So welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome you to the ETH Language Technology webinar series, which is organized by our ETH chair on AI and language technologies. All recordings are in the URL that I guess most of you already know because you registered. And here we have the lineup after the exciting talk that we will have with Thamar in a minute. You have the lineup for approximately every month, first or second week, the seminars that we'll have in this season. So it's a pleasure to introduce Thamar. I'm really excited about this talk. She's a professor of NLP and MBZ, the AI University in Abu Dhabi, and she's also the Vice Provost for Faculty Excellence and Advancement. He's working on NLP for low resource settings, multilingual data, including code switching and information extraction. She's very well known in the area, so in a way, this introduction is not necessary. For instance, you might have learned that she was in the board of the North American chapter of the ACL, and she was PC co-chair for NACOL 2019 and co-editor of ACL Rolling Review Initiative. Thank you very much for your service, Thamar. We really are thankful for all these works. And finally, she was also the general chair of the 2024 EMNLP conference. So having said that, Thamar, the floor is yours. I'll finish sharing, and you are welcome to share yours.
Thank you so much for the very warm introduction. I appreciate it. I'm still recovering from the trauma of serving as part of the ACL Rolling Review. But I highly recommend everyone to experience that.
Okay.
I'm just kidding, it's not trauma. Yeah. But I'm very happy to be talking to you online and happy to see some familiar close friends like Paolo. And thank you for inviting me. Happy to be talking about this work. It's grounded on the past. I guess like you can say that since I started working on code switching, it's a low resource language, and so really since the last 20 years or so for my career. But more recently, it's focused on the more recent work with my postdoc at NAFU on resources for African languages. So one of the things that I guess you are familiar with or sensitive to is the fact that the technology we're developing is predominantly catering for a few languages, right? It has this effect that we call WEIRD. WEIRD is an acronym that stands for Western, Educated, Industrialized, Rich, and Democratic. It means that the technology we develop for the most part caters for languages from these countries, right? That are part of this WEIRD set, and therefore leaves behind the global majority, right? And so if you think about it, the differences between the status of technology for the global majority and high resource languages, we can say, and this is what we discuss in this paper, that it's like Zeno's paradox in NLP, where if you guys remember what Zeno's paradox talks about, it's about the story of Achilles and the turtle, where as much as Achilles is fast, Achilles cannot really overtake the turtle because the turtle starts ahead of Achilles. And so even if Achilles halves the distance between the turtle and himself, then he can never catch up. And this is kind of what we argue that is the state of NLP for low resource languages, because high resource languages start far ahead and they keep moving, right? The progress and the resources available, they keep advancing and they keep accumulating while we try to keep up for low resource languages and creating the resources and creating the technology. And in some sense, I think that for some of these low resource languages, maybe we should forget about this idea of catching up. And we should assume what will happen if we assume that we take the knowledge that we have, but we shouldn't try to replicate exactly, because this is how we remain behind, because we're catching up to something that is a moving target. I've also, so some of our previous work as well, we have tried to understand more systematically the landscape of research in low resource languages. And so with my postdoc and collaborators, we analyzed a set of over 500 papers that talk about low resource and venues, very select venues, only STAR-CL and speech processing competences. And so we leave behind a lot of other things. But we took all these papers that coined the term low resource, and we tried to understand what exactly do they mean when they mean low resource, because we had a sense that it's a very generic, it's a big umbrella, right? A lot of people say I'm working on low resource, but we don't really know what. And so if we look at these papers, we find that there are three predominant types of work that refer to the term low resource. One category refers to low resource because of the tasks and domains. So even though they may be working with data that is in English for that specific task and domain, it's a low resource setting according to the authors because there's a lack of annotated data. And a clear example of this, for example, is if you work in depression detection, for example, or some medical condition, something that has to do with NLP for health. And there's very little data. Immediately becomes low resource because you have a lack of sufficient annotated data. Then there's another type of papers under the ones that we studied where we call it the similar category, where they pretend. Sorry? We're good? Please let me know and let me know if it's not clear, if I go too fast or if you have questions.
Fine. I think it was just somebody who didn't unmute
the mic. Yeah.
Actually, it's Herman from our center. Herman, your mic was this.
That's the way it happens to all of us, even after COVID. So it's fine. So the second category is the simulated scenario, where again, we may be working with data that is in a high resource language, for example, English, but we simulate that we are scarce in annotated data. And this is because we tend to believe that if we do that, then we are developing technology that will be useful in real low resource settings. And I have papers on this. So I'm not putting, I'm not saying this is right or wrong. I'm just saying we categorize how we describe these papers. And then the third category is with the actual language is low resource, right? Factors like annotated data or the number of speakers create this low resource situation. And then you have the percentage of all the papers that we annotated. But in general, we see that it's hard to measure or keep track of the progress of technology for low resource languages when you have this very huge umbrella term, low resource. And in some of the papers, most of the papers, what happens is it's not clearly defined what exactly is low resource. Like you have to go fish for it, right? So if you wanted to be more systematic and to automate this analysis is hard. So when you studied what determines low resourceness, I can tell you the categories, but when you see what are the underlying factors, the factors of why a language is low resource is not just data availability, right? So language is low resource because of socio-political forces, colonial history of language policy, official status, for example, in some countries, this is very common of colonized countries or countries that were at some point a colony. There's a historical point where one language is preferred over another, or one language is actually forbidden, right? And another language is preferred, and therefore that creates a lot of issues with the support and development for that language. There's also community agency. So how much of the technology that is being developed for these languages includes speakers from these communities, economic resources as well. So the funding availability. The digital device access has an effect, and the linguistic knowledge as well. How much of the knowledge is documented? Standardization of the language. For example, a lot of the languages, in particular, for example, Africa, are spoken and they don't have a standard auto writing system or grammar for them that has been documented. So the fact of this is that these issues are also interrelated, right? So one causes the other. For example, for social political forces or policies will affect how much that language is documented and how much effort, and if it's a language of instruction, and that also affects the native speaker population, the size of the active community. And there's a lot other, there's other distinctions. So there's a very nice paper by Monojit, my colleague Monojit, and others, where they actually come up with these very nice categories for low resource languages, and they have categories like the hopefuls and the scraping bys and the left behinds, and it's a very nice paper. I recommend it. However, that language, that paper only categorizes languages with respect to the number of speakers. And where we argue is that it's not just the language, the number of speakers. If you see the work, there was that in the paper that you can see in the Xenox paradox. You can see languages that have equivalent number of speakers, and their status is vastly different. It will fall into a different, it cannot fall into the same category of the hopefuls of the scraping bys, because the context of the language, the socio-political forces behind that community are very different, and therefore they have vastly different resources and status, right? So one of them could be like the government has initiative to document and preserve the language, whereas the other doesn't, right? And the community is slowly dying. So these are side factors and side considerations to keep in mind when we're discussing low resource scenarios. But what I really want to focus on today is I want to talk a little bit more about this AFRI MCQA corpus. The paper was just released last week, I believe. It's a new corpus that is focusing on African languages and is led by my postdoc Kanafu. So it's a multimodal cultural corpus for question answering of African languages. What we did is we collected over 7,000 image-grounded question answer pairs. I'll show you some examples of what those look like. And we also have speech here. So the questions are written in native language by native speakers. They're also translated in English, but we also have their spoken questions. So we can use speech. We have close to 60 hours of recorded speech. These corpus represent 12 countries and 15 different languages. And these are the categories for the questions. So it's cultural because the content of the questions is centered around the knowledge that only native speakers or people that live in those communities will be able to answer. Cultural related questions that only they can answer. Multimodal because in order to answer the question, you have an image, you need to understand the image, and you need to have the cultural background of the region and the language. But we add also the additional modality of speech. So in this map, ANAFO shows the languages that are covered in this corpus. Like I said, it's 15 languages. It's one of the richest collections of annotated data that covers languages from Africa. And yet you can still see there's a lot of countries in the continent that are not covered. So the African continent is home to over 2,000 of the world's languages. I think it concentrates around 30% of the languages of the world, if I remember correctly. Oh, here, I think I have it here. Oh, no, here's a case study. So for one example of the languages, Tui that I'm not sure how to pronounce. This is one of the 15 languages that we cover in AFRI MCQA. This language has over 9 million speakers. It's spoken in Ghana. And it's a tonal language with 2 different tones. And however, despite having a sizable population of speakers, we really don't have a lot of NLP technology to support this language. There's no standard orthography, and there's very limited digital presence. So I repeated that. I just repeat that. Here's an example of one of the questions that we have in AFRI MCQA. So there's the image. There's a traditional clay pot from Nigeria. So the data or the way you're supposed to work with this is you see the image, there's a question, and then you're supposed to know the answer if you're really familiar with Nigeria, right? And if you understand the language. And so every data point, like it says there, combines vision, text, and speech in parallel, and we can do cross-modal experiments. We have done some of the cross-modal experiments, but not all of the available options. But I will talk about what we have done. And in this case, we ask what the object is. What is the object that is shown in the picture, right? And it's a multiple choice because we know that's the easiest thing to do for evaluated models automatically, but we also did open-ended, so I'll show you that. So first about the data collection procedures, we follow, so this corpus follows the work that was done in collaboration with many others in 2024, the CVQA corpus. So we do selection and training of speakers. We expect the speakers to be fluent in English and the native language, to be residing in the country of their language. And then we ask them to do 50 pilot Q&A samples for training. We use Upwork to recruit. And if you see the details of the paper, we pay a fair wage. Then we do, if after we pay and evaluate and we like the quality, then we offer more data, more annotation. That means that we select a subgroup of people to continue the work. And then they will annotate about 500 question answer pairs. We ask them to provide their own images if they're happy to. And they can decide what is the license of the images, like if they want to share their image for academic purposes, or if you want to open more. And we ask them to record audio both in the native language and in English. And then we have a quality review. So we have, as collaborators, we have them be language coordinators. So all our language coordinators are co-authors of the paper. They are the ones that go back into cleaning up and analyzing this main annotation process. They check for the cultural appropriateness of the data, like if this is something that is really relevant to test your knowledge about the specific language and region. We check out the quality and also the structure generation, for example, if this is a good quality of the structures for the multiple choice and all these things. And so there's a process. It's been a very elaborate and time-consuming process. So once we have collected the data, then, or before, of course, before we find the corpus, but presenting here the nice flow of the story is we have 4 research questions. One is how do multimodal large language models understand African cultural context in visually grounded question answering. So we test, the awareness of the region. Research question 2, how does the input modality, if we give text versus if the input is speech, how will that impact performance? Research question 3, how does query language affect performance? So remember, because we have the question in the native language and translated in English by humans, I mean, how does that, using which language, how will that have an impact on what the language is able to do? And how does the task format multiple choice versus open-ended affect accuracy? And some of these things, of course, you will be able to guess, if not all of them, but it's still good to know the magnitude of the difference so that we can point and prioritize research. So the models we selected, they have to have multimodal capabilities, and we selected a set of different sizes. I try to focus on open weight models. I try to encourage my students to stay away from closed proprietary models, because I don't think it's a good environment for academics to pay companies to tell them how good or how bad their models are. But it's hard for me to keep this argument. So they still want to try the proprietary models. So fine, we have proprietary models in the paper. They feel like if they don't have them, the reviewers will not accept the paper, which I don't think it should be the case, and I don't think is the case, but sometimes I'm too tired to argue, to continue arguing my point. So the evaluation setup, we have zero-shot evaluation, we have location-aware prompts. That means that during the question, we add the location that is relevant. So we say, for example, in Ghana, what is blah, blah, blah. And so therefore we allow the model to be grounded in the right location. So we give them clues. And we use GPT for all mini judge for as a judge for open-ended. And then out of those, we also have 50 samples that are evaluated by humans so that we can kind of understand what is the accuracy. So in terms of the findings, here's the first experiment. So text multiple choice visual question answering. This is English versus a native language. The y-axis is accuracy, as you can see here. These blue lines are English, orange are native. And this line here is what you will get for random choice, because we give them 3 options plus the correct one. So they have 4 options, and a random guesser will get around 25%. So you can see that on the one hand, all the models are doing better than random. But in some cases, it's very minor differences against random, and proprietary models are doing better. Right, and what we can see is that the open weight models have somehow of a larger gap with respect to the performance of the native questions versus the English, but there's still also a gap here, right? And this is one of these results, not necessarily that there's a difference. Well, actually, the fact that there's a difference, I want to say clearly more, is what annoys me of our current state of affairs when we say that these models are multilingual. Because multilingual, from the point of view of a human speaker, means that if we know the answer to a question, we speak more than one language, and we know the answer to the question, we can answer the question in the multiple languages we manage, that we use, right? So in other words, for us, if I read something in Spanish, then I am able to communicate the same information in English, right? And this is not what is happening with our models, right? So it's clearly the same model. It's supposed to be multilingual, but for some reason, the model can answer the same question in English, but it can answer the same question in the native language. So there's a disconnect now. That disconnect can be for multiple things, and we'll see some of the possible reasons. But in general, I would like to have multilingual models where you don't see these differences. They can be terrible, or can be like middle of the pack, but like if they know the answer, they should be able to answer. If they don't know the answer in English, they should know the answer in the other language if they have the ability to use the language, right? But here, of course, this is what we see that is not. So here are the results of open-ended. Not surprisingly, when you lose the options and you just expect the model to generate the answer, performance drastically drops, right? And this is no surprise to anyone, because instead of choosing between 4 options, you're like needing to generate the answer. For this, like we mentioned, is LLM as a judge. I think in general, I don't really pay a lot of attention to closed versus open, but my important message from here is that, you know, for me, what matters is that if you do open-ended question answering, performance is really bad. So that's one message there. So one of the conclusions here is that multiple choice is one of the possible things that can happen. Multiple choice is different than understanding, right? A model can have the right answer because they guess correctly, or a model can, but it cannot generate the answer just by chance, right? That may not, that's the chances of that happening are really, really low. But also, even in order to answer correctly, we claim that the model needs to understand the question. It must understand the question, but in multiple choice setting, that's not necessarily the case, right? There may be other factors. There may be the fact that the model is analyzing, contrasting the options, playing around with the options, pretty much like a human would do if they don't know the answer, right? They start discarding options, or they start playing a different game instead of trying to, instead of to fill in the gap of the knowledge. So here's what we can find. So the reveals most benefit from answer selection as from true understanding. Now where that happens, that's an interesting question, right? So one of the questions we ask or try to analyze, is it language or is it the culture? So in other words, yeah, performance drops when you go for open-ended questions, and performance drops when you use a native language. But is it because the model doesn't have the knowledge, therefore has a gap of cultural awareness? Or is it because the model doesn't understand the language? And in order to sort of try to get some indication of what was going on, we did different experiments. In this case, what we try to do is take those models that we used in the previous stage and evaluate their performance in other tasks that are covering languages from Africa, and where you have the English and the native language part of it. And so you have in this the AFRI XNLI corpus, the AFRI MMLU. So this is the part from the massive multitask language understanding task, the part that corresponds to African languages, and this is our corpus. And then you see the performance in English and the native language, and then you see the delta here. So there are larger gaps. The point here is that we have larger gaps than what a simple cultural gap will imply. So it seems that these models are lagging behind and having issues with our tasks, but it may not just be the fact that they're not aware of the region. It's just the fact that they also lack the language skills to be able to answer. Even if they knew the language, right, which it shows that in English they're answering, they're not able to retrieve that in the native language. Here are the questions using audio. So for this setting, what we do is that we use the speech to ask the question, to pose a question to the model, and then we ask the model to generate the text as an answer. And we can see the performance. Audio imposes additional challenges to the models, and so we see performance dropping compared to giving text as input. And you can see there, they're still, so you can see that all the models are very close to random, basically, right? And there's a bigger gap for native versus English. And I think another important point is that even for English, the performance drops. And it may be because we have some accented English as well, which again points out to some of the weaknesses. These are the results of audio open-ended English versus native. So these are even worse, like really, really bad performance. So these aren't even recordable. So the models lack really an ability to understand what is being said. So our messages here, our finding is that speech is a bottleneck for this. Open-ended with native audio accuracy. So you can see the differences in there. Gemini with the proprietary model doing much better than the other models. A further experiment to understand why the experiments with audio are really, really bad. We did another experiment where we asked the model to identify the language and also to do a transcription of the question. So this is a separate tasks, right? So this is not answering the multiple choice question answering, but it's more like we give the speech and we ask the model, do you identify the language? This is what we have here in A. And then the second part is we give the question and we ask the model to transcribe, right? To do speech recognition. And just for it, so that we have them side by side, we have the open-ended BQA performance of the models. And so you see that not surprisingly, the ones that achieve the highest performance in terms of being able to answer are the ones that have the highest performance for language identification. So this model is really good at identifying the language based on the speech and has a word error rate that is smaller than the rest of the languages, right? And the other ones are really bad, like basically Gemma is able to recognize some of the languages, but the word error rate is really, really bad. Right? It's almost all of the words are incorrectly. So not surprisingly, the performance is super bad. So Gemini is near imperfect. Those are the points that I just mentioned. Without LID, models route wrong or hallucinate content. I'm not really sure. So this is an experiment that was done in the paper. I think this is interesting to know. I'm not sure that I agree that in order to solve the task, you need to know what the language is. Because you can understand, maybe you have familiarity, you cannot name the language, but the fact that you can name the language doesn't really mean that you can understand it anyhow. But these are just, further analysis experiments. So a simple model of what is going on, what are the failures, what the model can hear, the language ID fails, or hallucinates what is transcribed, then the question is misunderstood or completely, like you cannot answer something you don't understand. Native text understanding lags behind English, so the meaning is lost, right? Because the questions written in the native language are also not being able to be understood. And then the third one is one aspect of this why these models work is that or don't fail. I'm sorry, is because they don't have the cultural knowledge, right? So this number is explained by the experiments we do with English, right? Because everything that is not answered in English, you can assume is because the model lacks the cultural background. And these are all the experiments that the model cannot understand the speech and the model cannot understand the text because it lacks the skills of the native languages. So bottom line is that better reasoning isn't enough. We need better representation, meaning that coverage of knowledges, the knowledge of diverse cultural backgrounds, and the retrieval across language, speech, and culture needs to be improved because even if the knowledge of the culture is in English, then the models are not able to retrieve that and produce the right answer. So, I'm on time. These are the answers to the original questions. I don't think these are surprising to anyone. There's a poorly how well do MMS understand African cultural context? It's not there, right? Because even in English, the performance is not on par with what you will see for a similar task in a weird context, using the weird definition from the beginning of the talk. The text versus speech is a catastrophic drop, so there's nowhere that has a lot of room for improvement. English versus native language understanding and cultural knowledge gaps is at both. Our control experiments show some gaps in language gaps and cultural gaps. And then the RQ4 is a research question 4 is something we have seen in other papers, right? The multiple choice question answering is very artificial. It greatly simplifies the task. And we should really move from there to just focus on open-ended, because this is where the more realistic challenges are, right? I don't know of anyone that goes to these LLMs and asks ChatGPT, what do I do in order to reduce my task? Do I do X? Do I do Y? Do I do Z? No one does that. So it's, but that's the easiest thing that we can do, right? So we keep doing this. Looking forward, I now am interested in exploring multiple areas of research with the low resource agenda in mind. One of them is I have a student that is looking at the reasoning process and how and where the models are breaking down. So he has done some explorations and has found that before the input or before the activations go into the decoding layer, the model is correctly accumulating the probability in the right token for the target language. But then somehow when we go to the decoding phase, the model gets confused and gives a high probability to something that is not the right intended token. So it's a very weird thing that has been found in other papers. So he was verifying this knowledge. And so it's interesting to see what's going on. We're looking into that. We're looking into how can we pin down where things are being decomposed. And he has been able to verify that there are some specific heads inside the model, model layers that are constantly being in charge of doing some of the reasoning to answer some of the questions. And so regardless of the language, there are some heads, attention heads in the model that are responsible for some of the reasoning. That is very interesting. So that could mean that yes, there's some reasoning part that is like I expect, like we humans do, that is language agnostic. On the other hand, there may be some situations and some tasks where it's okay to be pinned into one language when you're reasoning. Like for example, this is something you can expect from us humans. When you are an adult learner of a second language, a lot of, for example, math. The math reasoning for me, I still have to go back to Spanish unless it's very simple counting. But if I have to do more complicated math, like in my mind, it comes naturally in Spanish because this is how I learn it. So in that scenario, it may be for the models, it's easier to reason and use reasoning strategies for certain tasks in English, for example, the high resource language, but then translate back to the correct language. And in others, for example, other cases are, for example, knowledge retrieval, right? If we're just extracting knowledge, it's okay if the knowledge is grounded in a specific high resource language, and then we do translation, right? But we need to more exploration and more work so that we can actually effectively guide the models to do this, which I don't think it's what is happening. So I'm interested in exploring those things. For the specific context of African languages, there's a lot of work that can be done for speech first, for example, because like I said, there's more than 2,000 African languages, and a lot of them are mostly spoken. And so the technology that we mentioned for these 15 languages is now working with speech. Culturally grounded training. So there's still an issue, but there's a lot of work and there's a lot of people in our community working on improving the coverage of more regions of the world in the data. And then the cross-lingual transfer. I'm also very interested in this last part. I want to go back to to bilingual lexicons and grammars and see where we can do something for very rapidly generating content in the right language using these LLMs. I just had a discussion today with my student where he wanted to do some continued pre-training to do some adaptation to a new language. And then that requires to annotate data and create a new benchmark. And I'm like, no, please, let's not do that. It's just that I'm so tired of me personally. This is what I want to do. I don't want to annotate more data and then release it so someone else develops a technology that can cover that language. So instead, let's just see what can we do to transfer the knowledge. Same as we do. And again, I want to see if I can use images, for example. This is what we do when we are learning a new language, right? We don't know anything, but sometimes we use like our own grounding, right? So if I want to study German, and then maybe I start with images and say, okay, so these are classes in English. How do I say this in German, right? And can we use images to leverage knowledge and then bootstrap cross-lingual transfer somehow? So beyond that, recommendations in general for how we address and how we talked about and what can be done for low-resource languages. I think researchers, we need to engage with the community members, and this is not me. This is like people have said this before. Stephen Bird gave a beautiful talk at ACL recently, and he has very nice papers that talked about this. Grassroots organizations are very important. I mean, I see the example from Asakani, for example, and how much progress has been done. Take also Arabic. Arabic now I heard this from others, that is no longer a low resource language. It has not just one, but multiple large language models, right, for Arabic. They are developed for Arabic. And then you have also your own conference, and so it is possible that Arabic is no longer that, but it starts from the community of organizing, right? And this points to the other point of conferences, create an alternative track, reduce cost of attendance. So the Arabic language and the event, and now it's a conference, started as a workshop, right? And now it's a standalone conference. And of course, industry, we need support, financial support. I don't have to tell you this because we are in academia. From the point of view of government policies for inclusion, language preservation, I actually don't engage in a lot of that, but I do have a lot of colleagues that work on this, and they do believe that this will have an important impact. And funding agencies, of course, because as academics, we don't do things unless we have research resources for that. With that, I'm going to stop, I think, right on time, 45 minutes. I want to acknowledge that Nafu, he led the work on CVQA. He's a wonderful postdoc, soon moving on to an academic position in Europe. But there's a QR code and there's a data set, and I'll be happy to take questions. If there are questions.
Thank you very much, Thamar. Thanks for the talk. It's been exciting, and personally I have a few questions, but I will let people start first. So yeah, raise your hand like Paulo did. So Paulo, mic is yours.
Thank you. Hola, Thamar. Well, or maybe I should say Jumbo, because you are very much into African languages now. Okay, well, seriously speaking, it's really a pleasure to see the interesting stuff you are doing, and no matter where you move, you are doing great. So it's really a pleasure for all of us who had the opportunity to know you, I mean, well in advance. So great. I was curious, you tried to summarize about the kind of errors that you notice no matter you didn't distinguish, at least in the slides, if there were common patterns among African languages that are similar, or at least I would be interested to know if the kind of errors of those African languages were of countries that have been English colonies are different somehow to those where that have been French colonies, for instance. So those where they speak English on a daily basis, maybe they have less reasoning problem in some cases. I don't know. I think that it could be interesting to distinguish a little bit among African families of languages and this dichotomy English.
The cultural context.
Yeah. I don't know if you did some study from this perspective or not yet. Thanks.
No, thank you so much for that. That question it seems like you know what we didn't do, but it's a great suggestion. I'll be happy to talk to Anafu and say we need to talk to Paolo because he has great ideas. We have not that analysis, and it's such an interesting dimension to explore. Thank you for pointing it out, and I'll make sure to bring it back with Anafu. And I'll ping you after we have some findings so that we can let you know. But maybe we want to work on this together.
Okay. Hakuna Matata.
Thank you, Paolo. And Thamar, anyone else? Well, while somebody else raises the hand. So really interesting. You might know that we also did similar studies here in the Basque Country because in our research center we are working also in a supposedly low resource language, Basque. Mm-hmm. But it is also true that it's a 50th language in Common Crawl, so I'm not sure where it stands compared to other African languages. It's probably in a good position regarding amount of text, at least. Maybe not in audio, but in text. So in NeurIPS 24, People Image Center did a data set called Bertakua, and they did a similar analysis to the one you did, but for Basque. So they had local languages about the local culture and global languages about, say, the global, the world state of questions. And they were produced in Basque, and then they were translated to English. So it was a different, the different route that usually we take when we do data sets. So the original was in Basque. And what we found out with the models, so this is from NeurIPS 2024. So it is true that these were the language models 2 years ago, but I think the conclusion should follow. And what we found is that Basque, the models which were, actually we had a model of our own, which we continually pre-train with Basque language. And that model was best for the local questions. Whereas the English model, so when you ask the questions in Basque, the results were better for the local questions, and for you were asking the questions in English, the results were better for the global questions. So this was an interesting finding. And something else that we found is that the gap between the making questions in the two languages, that's Basque and English, was smaller than the gap between asking local questions versus global questions, which is an interesting contrast with your study, but it will be, well, because the languages are different and maybe the low resourcefulness of the languages is also different. It will be interesting to contrast these findings with yours.
Yeah, for sure. So just to make sure that I understood, your first point is very much aligned, right? Because you mentioned that if you ask in English about English content, it's better. And if you ask in Basque about Basque content, that works better.
Yeah, yeah. That was the first finding.
Right, but it's the same model, right?
Yeah, it's the same model. It's also well, we ran several models, so this was true
But
for
it's consistent,
several
yeah,
models.
yeah. But this is the point that for me, what makes it frustrating for me is the same model, right? So again, we don't see this multilingual behavior from a point of view of the human ability because it's the same model. The model has the knowledge, but the model is not able to recover the knowledge. Because wait, no.
Yes.
Yeah, it is. I'm sorry. I mean, it's because I'm mixing my marbles. It is not able to recover because if it can answer, it should be able to answer. Like if it's knowledge base, it should be able to answer in whatever languages the model manages.
Yeah.
And we don't see that, right? And we don't see it. So this is where I want to go next. I mean, these particular work points out different deficiencies for African languages and gaps for African background. But for me, like I want to dive into this inconsistency in performance. Because if you know the answer, the answer should not be language specific.
Yeah. Yeah, we also found that the transfer was not good. What actually found an interesting transfer is that when we did the continual pre-training in Basque, the quality of the answers for the English questions for Basque native cultural things improved. So there was a transfer from reading Basque text into the English, but the transfer was incomplete. So that's more or less what you are mentioning now. Now the setting was a bit different because it was not a language model which was multilingual from the start. It was multilingual, but the knowledge of Basque was low. So as you mentioned, as one of the lines of research, we actually have pursued doing continual pre-training and improving the results for one target language, which is Basque. Actually, with very good results. Actually, we were able to get a language model which in some tasks is as proficient as GPT in Basque. So we're really happy about that.
Oh, wow. That sounds very cool.
Yeah, I'll send you a pointer, maybe.
Yes, please. It seems to me almost like you have to force these models to always do translation. Like, I wonder what happens if you do in training. You always ask the model as a secondary learning objective to do translation. Just translate whatever you're training or you continue pre-training for or continue or post-training. Whatever you're doing, I wonder what would happen if we always ask the model to do translation.
Yeah, so that might be so that's something we've been trying, but with no positive results. So with the positive results, yeah, really with translation, we were not able to improve results. So we just use continual pre-training with some tricks for avoiding catastrophic forgetting, which is the main enemy of continual pre-training. I'll send you a pointer.
Yeah, please. That's very interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, I was curious about the way forward. So one limit, I was hoping that I was expecting that you would mention that, will be a priority to get more text for the languages, because the more text you have, the better the quality, right? And same with audio.
Yeah, but that's like we keep going in that direction because we keep building bigger models. But this is not how we work, right? This is not how humans learn. We really cannot even afford to process half of the data that is ingested into these models, and we use language in a much better way than this technology. So there's a lot of inefficiency, and I don't want to go in that direction. Like just because I think we should be exploring other questions. Me, like my group, I want to go in a direction where we say, okay, what happens if you just have 10 examples? Or just assume that that's all the money you have. You have 10 examples, but you have the grammar and you have a large language model that is supposed to be multilingual. What can you do if you have that scenario?
Yeah.
Maybe you add images, maybe you add something else. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm not opposed to training with more data, but maybe I want to do something that is not just more data. Because the problem, I'm also wondering, I don't know if you guys have thought about this, but I wonder what will happen. What will be our technology right now today if the language that is driving the design of architectures wasn't English? What if it was Japanese, where you don't even have word boundaries? Like, how will that have changed the technology that existed today if Japanese was driving the development? Because everything we do for other languages is adjusted by what we know for and what we do for English. And for example, tokenization is a huge problem, right? We know the BPE algorithm affects low result languages because the vocabulary that is absorbed or that is learned is fixed on English. And then you can expand it when you add other languages, but then that doesn't work as well. Anyhow, you still end up over fragmenting low resource languages. And even if you do like the BEOLMO model or these tokenization free models, you still use the hyperparameters that are based on English. For example, your entropy threshold for these tokenization free models is based on English. Now, when we're talking about it, we're working on this, and that doesn't make sense because you're encoding at the byte level, and you think that doesn't matter. But if you think about it, there are some languages where a single character takes more than 1 byte to represent. Doesn't happen for English, but it happens for other languages, and that has implications on, how you do your patching on these models. But we don't. We are trying to explore that. We're trying to explore what happens if we do something that is tokenization free, but that has some knowledge on how the language works, and in particular, like at least encoding. And you have this work from Allen AI Institute where they actually look at the encoding, right? And they have one threshold for the tokenization free that is designed for the different encoding scripts. So if it's the Banagari, or the Banagari family or whatever, then you send it here, and then it's one threshold. And if it's another one, you go. So I think more of that will be.
Yeah, I think Cohere also has some paper on this line of adaptive tokenization or specialized tokenization.
Yeah. There's a lot of work on that because it's a painful process for low result languages, right?
Yeah, it makes you pay more for the same service. Because you need more tokens to represent your input. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, we have another question in the chat. Thanking you and asking about Arabic. Actually, that was something I had in mind also, because we talked about low resource languages, but also in many languages there are many dialects. So he's asking about the state of the art for Arabic dialects and how this is linked to the state of the art of Arabic.
Yeah, I think MSA is in a better shape, right? But Arabic dialects are not. There are some like Gulf dialect, for example. There's very little resources compared to Egyptian Arabic. I think Egyptian Arabic may have more. But yeah, you're right. Dialects are still low resource, and they're not handled. They're not managed, or there's the ability, the performance is still lagging behind. Even for these recent models that are developed for Arabic in general, the amount of the coverage for the dialects is very different. It's very uneven.
Yeah,
but at least the community is very rich, right? They're not low resource from the point of view of the researchers, right? They have a very active and strong research community. So that will start to become better and better.
Yeah, thank you. So I think we don't have a question, so we are on time. So thank you very much, Thamar. It was a very inspiring talk, and in a topic which, at least in our country and in many research groups, is challenging, and we know that it affects a large part of the population, because a large part of the world lives in countries with maybe so-called underserved languages. That's another concept I heard. So
yes,
let's say
understood.
yeah. Okay, so thanks, Thamar, and thanks everyone for.
Thank you so much. It was great talking to you guys. Happy to be on this seminar. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you for attending. Okay, bye, Thamar. Bye, everyone.
Bye. See you.